Hi, in this segment, I'm going to talk to you, the new buyer, the person or persons who have never bought a home in the Montgomery County area of the DMV. It's scary, it's overwhelming, and it doesn't have to be. By the end of this video, I want you to know what happens, in what sequence, and where buyers typically make mistakes along the way and prevent costing you time and money. Why do buyers feel confused when they first start this process? Well, a couple of different reasons. The biggest one is it's not that this is a difficult process. People do it all the time, every day. Problem is you've got many different professionals working with you or for you, and they're all talking a different language. You've got your real estate agent who's talking to you about houses and contracts and things like that. You've got the lender who's talking about interest rates and points and all of this sort of stuff. Then you have the title company and they're talking about title insurance and all of those things that go along with the title search. And all of these people are throwing information at you at rapid fire and not necessarily explaining to you what it is they're sending you. So that can cause confusion right out the gate. In the Montgomery County area, you have the added aspect of older homes. You have HOAs, things like that, which add different aspects to the process that you may not have even thought of, which add to the confusion that's already there. So, like I said, none of this is hard, but you have to really get explanations. You have to know what it is everybody's talking about. If you understand it, you can breeze right through it. Let's face it, this is not rocket science. It's not neurosurgery. It's buying a house. It's something people do every day of the week, 12 months a year, years and years on end. One of the first areas to understand has to do with the financial end of things. Before you start actually seriously and in earnest shopping for a house, it's a good idea to have yourself pre-approved. And then the lenders will talk to you about pre-approval, pre-qualification, what's the difference? Well, pre-approval is stronger. Pre-approval means they've gone through some degree of underwriting and checked out your documentation, whereas a pre-qualification is a little lighter. It may or may not include a hard pull of your credit score. So you have to know the difference between those two things. A pre-approval letter is stronger, and it's what most lenders in the area do, but you have to be careful to know exactly what it is that you are in fact getting on this point. Now, when the lender's putting this together for you, they're looking at a bunch of different things. They're looking at your credit scores, they're looking at your income, they're looking at your debt, they're looking at whatever reserves you might have. So, they're taking all of these things and putting them together to provide that pre-approval letter that you're going to need. And this is going to need to go along with any offer you're going to make. You also want to take a look at your cash. So there are different levels of down payment. You can buy a house these days with anywhere from 3% to 20% and beyond. And each of these programs has different qualifications, different interest rates, different requirements. So you have to understand that. But it's not just the down payment, you have closing costs. And be prepared for the fact that it's not just the cost of the house, your down payment, and whatever mortgage you're going to get. There are closing costs involved, and these can run anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5% of the purchase price, depending on the area, depending on what you're buying, and depending on your loan program that you're getting. Now, one of the big things you need to understand is that when the lender approves you, they're going to give you a certain ceiling of the maximum of what you can qualify for. And that's going to factor in the price of the property against your income and already whatever debt you may have. It's going to factor in homeowner insurance costs. It's going to factor in any condo or HOA fees. It's going to factor in taxes, those sorts of things. And they're going to give you a number you can qualify for. 500,000, 600,000, whatever that may be. I want you to really understand, though, that what they're telling you qualify for isn't necessarily what you're going to be comfortable with. The lender is setting the maximums based on what they feel you can afford to buy based on your risk to them. They're worried about their risk in this whole thing. Are they going to be able to keep this loan in place after settlement, knowing having a pretty good assurance that you're not going to default on it? So that's what they're worried about. They don't really care about your budget, but your budget may factor in things that are rather expensive these days, such as childcare, perhaps, or maybe you have a parent to take care of, or maybe you have some other financial obligation that many others might not have. And you have to factor that in. And these things aren't necessarily going to get factored in when you're getting pre approved. They're going to factor in your debt, they're going to factor in the cost of the house, but they're not going to factor in your budget. So you have to be really honest when you're looking at this. Is what they're qualifying for, is what they're qualifying you for what you feel you can actually afford. Now, don't cut yourself short. Keep in mind that you're going to have a loan that's going to go out into the future. So it doesn't hurt to stretch a little bit so that you don't have to do this process again in 3 to 5 years, because then you're actually costing yourself more. But at the same time, you want to make sure that it fits your budget and that you can afford to buy it based on what your income is and your expectations are for the next year, 2, 5, 10, 20. All right. So factor in the fact that you're going to get pre-approved for something, but that isn't necessarily what you feel you can afford. And honestly, it's not even a good idea to shop up at the limits of whatever you're pre-approved for, because if you get into a competitive situation, you may end up losing before you even get out the gate. So it's really important before you get going to understand the financial end of this. What are you pre-approved for? What are you comfortable with? And what do you feel you can manage? And do you have a lender you can work with? Okay, so you've got the financial things under control. You've got your pre-approval letter. You're ready to roll. So now you're going to go see houses. Well, how do you do that? Just to mention this, I have another video with a system on how to look at homes, but the big thing is you should have a system for looking at houses. It's not just a fun matter of taking a few afternoons off or a weekend to go out and look at houses. The more successful buyers have a system. They know what to look for. They know what to not look for. They know what sort of sequence they're following. They know what to do after they've made a showing. So have a system in place that you use for every house you look at. That way you can compare one to the next and make your decision not based on completely emotions and how you feel, but also what logistical and analytical matters that factor in for this particular house you're looking at. Now, I'll tell you this too. Many people have this weird idea that it's not good to buy the house you saw first or even in the first set of showings. People think that there's always going to be something else out there. And while that may be true, if you find a house you really love, why not go for it? I've seen people over and over again see a house and they love it and it's a great house and it fits all the parameters that they've set, and they decide not to go for it and somebody else gets it. And I'll tell you what happens is they compare every house after that to that particular house. Well, this doesn't have blah as compared to the house on Oak Street. Well, this isn't quite as pretty. Well, this doesn't have as big a dining room. Compare every one. So if it's a house you can't get out of your head, I suggest you actually take a shot at it. If you don't get it, there's no harm in losing, but at least you won't ever have that nagging thing of, well, what if? It's not a bad thing to buy the first house or even the house in your first set of showings. If you love it, if it fits, don't second guess yourself, because you could be putting yourself in a situation where you now are comparing everything to it and you'll be frustrated from that point forward. Okay, so now you've found a house you want to go for. What happens next? Well, now you're going to put together your offer. Now, first thing I want to tell you about the offer is it is a proposal. Anything you put in writing to the seller is not binding until everybody's agreed to it. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I can't advise you on legal matters and on contracts particularly, but realize that the paperwork you're going to fill out is presented to the seller with the expectation of an approval or a rejection or something in between. So it's not binding until everybody makes it binding. So that's the first thing you got to know. You are not getting yourself into something you can't get out of it just by submitting an offer alone. Now, there are quite a few different things that you're going to put into that proposal, that offer you're going to make to the seller. Of course, one of them is the price. What are you willing to pay for? Whether you're going to start low and work your way up, or whether you're just going to give them what they want, or whether you're going to go over list. So, of course, one of the things is the price you're willing to pay. But there's also a deposit. A deposit acts like skin in the game, as it were. It is the money that you're saying is your good faith that you're going to buy this house. And that varies depending on the jurisdiction, the area, the size and price of the property. But there's going to be a deposit, and that's going to go in with the offer, and it's going to be held by the title company in most cases. And it's going to ensure that property is yours through the process toward settlement. So you're going to put a deposit in. You're going to have to work out what the deposit is. If you're going to have inspections, you're going to lay those out. Now, there are different types of inspections, and there are different inspections you can do. Typically, people will often want to do a home inspection, but there are things such as chimney inspections, roof inspections, mold inspections. There are all kinds of inspections one can do. They all cost you money, so you want to be prudent about which ones you do, but there are going to be inspections. You're going to lay out the time frames and how things work with regards to those inspections between you and the seller. So those are things that are going to go into your offer. Big thing to understand is there are timelines that go along, and these timelines have to be met because if you miss a timeline, you could be stuck or you could lose out on what you're trying to do. There are timelines, they're very specified. They're specified by day, and they're also specifying the time of day. So it's not only the day of the week, it's also the time of day when this has to be met. And if you miss it, you could be in trouble. So keep that in mind. Now, when you submit an offer, typically there's no deadline. Now, most sellers want to get their house under contract as quickly as possible. And of course, the buyer wants to know as soon as possible whether they're moving forward. So it's not a big deal usually that people are going to drag their feet or wait, although sometimes you do run into that. But generally speaking, there is no deadline. If you submit an offer on Saturday, maybe the seller will respond that day, maybe the next day, but generally speaking, is not going to be more than a day or two that you're going to get some sort of answer. When you do submit the offer, the seller has the right to accept, reject, counter, and there are different backs and forths that can go on. But the bottom line here is that there is no deadline for either party to respond at this phase of the game. Congratulations, you've gotten your offer accepted. So now what? Well, there's a bunch of things that are going to go into play right out the gate. First thing you're going to do is have to arrange for that earnest money that you've promised to be gotten into the hands of the person that's going to hold it. All right, so that's the first thing. Second thing is you're going to schedule any inspections that you've agreed to have done. And then also, it's a very good idea to start working on the insurance that's going to be required for the property so that you don't run into some situation down the road when it's too late to handle it. So these are a couple of things you're going to start with. The EMD, getting the earnest money deposit, that is going to be gotten into the hands of the holder. You're going to get your inspection scheduled. You're also going to lock in most cases your financing. Now, there is a little bit of time because if you do want to shop around and check with other lenders, you do have the ability to do that in most cases. But at some point very early on, you're going to lock that in and get the process going so that the lender has time to do its thing before settlement. Typically speaking, 30 to 45 days from contract acceptance to settlement. So there's not a lot of time, but it is enough. Now, once the contract is accepted and you're moving forward, there are a couple of things that you're going to have to pay for, maybe not at that time, but very shortly after. Of course, the earnest money deposit, which we talked about, you're going to get any inspections, you're going to pay for those. The appraisal is often something that gets paid out of pocket. So those are three things, generally speaking, that get paid for outside of the closing itself. Most other things, including the down payment and your other closing costs, they will get paid at the time of settlement through those proceeds. So now you're under contract. Now you've got the initial monies accounted for. Now it's time to move into your inspections if you're having them done. So in many cases, people have the opportunity to have a home inspection. There are a lot of details that go into that inspection, how it's handled, but generally speaking, and the things you need to know the most is this inspection needs to be done in a certain period of time, and it's usually pretty early in the process. You will have time to negotiate whatever options that you've employed in that contingency, but there's not a whole lot of time to get through that. Generally speaking, within the first week or 10 days, the seller wants to know exactly where they're at with regards to any repairs, credits, that sort of thing that are going to get done. So you're going to move into those inspections. In Montgomery County, Maryland, you also have as a contingency to have a radon test. And you do that in all the areas. The difference with Montgomery County is that if you decide not to have a radon test contingency as part of your contract, Montgomery County requires that the seller provide a radon test at some point on or before settlement, so you at least have that information. Doing it that way doesn't require that they do anything about it if the levels are high, but they do offer you that right in Montgomery County. No other area that I'm aware of in this region does that. So you have your inspections, your home inspection, your radon test, whatever tests you're going to do, those are the things you're going to work on at this point in the game, and you get those things nailed down. Lots of things you're going to talk about regarding those inspections. What's reasonable? What are the things you should ask for? What are the things that typically sellers are not going to pay for? How do you treat this negotiation period? Because you can blow the deal out of the water by handling it incorrectly. So it's a good idea to get good solid advice from somebody who knows the game so you know you're asking for the right things, that you get things that you want, and then you have maybe a little cushion on things that are less important but would be good to have as well. Try to get as much as you can, but don't try to take advantage of the seller because that's not going to go well. If you do have an inspection contingency, there is a way to get out of the contract. Again, it depends on how you've written it into the agreement and who has agreed to what. But in many cases, and in most cases, if you've got a home inspection contingency, that does allow for you the ability to get out of the transaction if you just can't come to terms with the other side of the table. By this time, you're pretty sure that you're moving forward. you've got the finances under control, you've got the inspections, and you know what the condition of the house is, you want to continue on with it. Now we're going to continue on as we have throughout the entirety of this transaction thus far. There's a lot of paperwork going back and forth between you and the lender, between you and the title company. So there's a lot of things, a lot of moving particles, a lot of moving things going back and forth between all parties that are going to be required to complete the transaction at settlement. This is when the process of underwriting occurs. There are guidelines to the loan process dictated by the federal government and even the local jurisdictions that require certain things to be in place in order for you to get the loan. They have to do with income, down payments, qualifications, tax returns, things like that. There are a lot of things that factor in. And the underwriter's job is to make sure that what you have fits the guidelines to allow that loan to actually go into place. They verify, you get a lot of paperwork back and forth, a lot of documents. In many cases, they're going to ask you for things 2, 3, 4 times because sometimes it just gets lost in the shuffle. So don't get upset about it. Just provide it. It's a good idea to have a lot of your records in digital form, as most people do today, which makes it easier to get things moving across to the other party as needed. But you are going to be sending back and forth a lot of information to the title company, to the lender, and this all goes towards the underwriting process. Right now, while all of this is going on, you're going to have the title company doing certain things. They're going to be searching the title. They're going to do a title search, as it's called. You want to make sure that the chain of ownership over the years, however many it might be, is clean, meaning that there's no unresolved liens. There are no unpaid mortgages. There are things that would prevent the clean transfer of title from one party to another. So they're going to be doing that. That's a big part of their job. They're also generally the outlet for title insurance, which protects you against ownership issues. Now, a quick word on that. There are two forms of a title insurance. One is the lender's coverage, one is the buyer's coverage. Buyer's coverage is optional, but highly recommended, and you should talk to the title company about the reasons to do or not to do. But the lender's coverage is always mandatory if you're getting a loan on the property. So there is going to be title insurance if you're borrowing money in this transaction. The question is going to be whether you purchase your owner's coverage in addition to the lender's coverage, and that's something you should discuss with the title company to know what's the best thing for you. Another thing to know about the title company is who represents whom. In this area, it is unusual for each party to show up at settlement with their own individual attorneys. In 21 years, I think it's happened once or twice. It's just, it doesn't happen. It's not that we tell you shouldn't have an attorney. This is a legal matter. And if you want representation, you should, of course, do that. But most people opt to not do that. The title company has attorneys involved, and their responsibility is make sure that the transaction is being done according to the law, according to the guidelines, according to the rules and regulations. They don't represent either side, either the seller or the buyer. They represent the transaction. And their job, which is highly regulated, is designed to make sure that everything is done properly and in accordance with the laws, rules, and regulations, and everything goes along with that. In many cases, you're also going to get a survey of the property as part of the transaction. Not always necessary. It's a good idea to have it, and the title company is where that gets done. There'll be a request during that time whether you want to do it. And there are a couple of different options on titles, but bottom line is if you want a survey, it's going to happen through the title company. It's another one of their jobs. So the title company's job is to put together all the information to the legal documents that allow for the legal transfer of the property from the seller to the buyer. Now we're at the finish line. Settlement. What happens now? First thing you're likely going to do is some sort of final walkthrough with your agent. A couple of things that you want to accomplish through that final walkthrough are if you had any repairs done, you want to verify that they were done and verify as best you can that they were done properly. So that's one thing. And even more importantly, is that the property is substantially in the same condition as it was when you agreed to buy it. So if you're agreed to buy this property and something happens, an act of God or Mother Nature, and there's a damage to the property that occurs, this is the point where you would verify and document that. This is also, as I said, where you're going to document and verify that the repairs that you had agreed to are actually done and done to your satisfaction. At settlement is when you're going to sign the papers to transfer the property from the seller to you. There's going to be a lot of paperwork, probably about a half an inch or so. And it's going to be loan documents. It's going to be verifications that you are who you say you are. There's going to be disclosures. There's going to be all kinds of paperwork. The vast majority of it is standardized and can't be changed. You just want to pay attention to the terms so that you're getting exactly what you expect to get and everything's supposed to be the way that it is, or everything is the way that it's supposed to be. Make sure your name's correct. Make sure your identity is as it's supposed to be. So this is where you sign. This is where you get the keys. This is where you actually legally take ownership of that property. Now, who attends settlement? Before the pandemic, it was very common that the buyer and the seller would be at the same settlement table and be shifting paperwork back and forth between all parties to make the process done in one setting. Since the pandemic, and because of the pandemic, it is not common at all for the buyer and seller to be at the same table. Generally speaking, the seller will sign ahead of time or in a different room, and the buyer will settle in their own setting by themselves. So it's uncommon anymore for buyer and seller to be at the same table signing the paperwork. And it's very common that they're not even done on the same day anymore. At that time, you're going to get copies of the things that you sign. You're going to get a copy of your title insurance binder. You may or may not get everything in paper. Many of the companies these days have opted for electronic transfer of all the documents, but they're going to give you at least a copy of the settlement sheet. They're going to give you a verification of your title insurance. They're going to give you the things that you're going to need to show that you, in fact, own the house when you change your utilities, when you change schools, if your kids go there, anything that you might need to do, which requires proof of where you live. You'll get copies of those, and the rest of it may show up to you in some PDF a week or so later. Now, what happens? Now you have a house. Now you can move in. Now you can do with it as you please. It is now yours. Now, what happens after settlement? Well, sometimes people will notice things that happened during the process that they weren't aware of, meaning that something that the seller said they did do or documented that they did do, maybe they didn't, and now you find it. This is not easy to address at this point because typically speaking, settlement stops any further action on the transaction. But if you can document that something wasn't done properly, you may have grounds. You probably need to speak with an attorney, speak with a title company, and get representation. Typically speaking, settlement is the end point, and anything that happens beyond that usually falls outside of the transaction. But if it does happen, you might need legal counsel to get it remedied. All right, so this is a basic rundown of a typical sort of real estate transaction in Montgomery County and in the DMV. All the jurisdictions have minor nuances that will vary a bit from each one, but generally speaking, this is how it works. You want to have your finances in order. You want to get a pre-approval. You want to find a house you love. You want to make your offers so that you get it under the terms that you want. And then you want to negotiate things like the inspection, the appraisal, all those things to your satisfaction, right along a very smooth wave to settlement, get your keys, go home and enjoy your new home. There's a lot more that goes into this. I've spent about 20 minutes or so talking to you about this. There's a lot more specifics and nuances that go into it, but this will give you the basic layout so you can feel like you are following a set path from beginning to end and at least have a general understanding of what happens and when. If you have any other questions, talk to your agent, give me a call. I'd be happy to help you out. And good luck on your next purchase.